Sarah Martinez had always been the quiet one in the room. At 32, she worked as a financial analyst for a mid-sized consulting firm in Washington, D.C., spending her days buried in spreadsheets and quarterly reports. Her colleagues saw her as dependable but unremarkable, the kind of person who would blend into any crowd without leaving a trace. What they didn't know was that Sarah's unassuming exterior masked years of specialized training. Before her corporate life, she had spent 8 years working for a classified government division, learning languages, surveillance techniques, and most importantly, how to read people. Her transition to civilian life 3 years ago was supposed to be permanent, a chance to live normally after years of living in shadows. The call came on a Tuesday morning while she was reviewing budget projections. Her former handler, Director James Chen, hadn't contacted her since her retirement. His voice carried the same measured tone she remembered, but there was an urgency beneath it that made her stomach tighten. "We need you back," he said without preamble. "There's a situation developing, and your specific skill set makes you our only viable option." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the phone. She had worked hard to build this new life, to forget the weight of secrets and the constant vigilance that had defined her previous career. "I'm not that person anymore, James. I made that clear when I left." "A foreign intelligence network has infiltrated several major corporations across the city," Chen continued, ignoring her protest. "They're not just gathering corporate secrets, they're positioning themselves for something much larger. We believe they're planning to destabilize key sectors of our economy." The gravity of his words settled over her like a familiar weight. Sarah walked to her office window, watching ordinary people go about their ordinary lives on the street below. They had no idea that their security, their livelihoods, possibly their entire way of life could be under threat. "Why me?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because they don't know who you are. You've been out long enough that your face isn't in their databases, but not so long that you've lost your edge. Plus, you understand corporate environments in a way our current operatives don't." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the pull of duty warring with her desire for peace. She thought about her small apartment, her weekend pottery classes, the book club she had joined where the most dangerous thing they discussed was whether the latest bestseller deserved its hype. "The network calls itself Meridian," Chen added. "They've been operating for at least 2 years, maybe longer. They recruit assets from within target companies. People with access, people with debts, people with secrets they'd rather keep buried." Despite herself, Sarah felt her analytical mind engaging with the problem. A long-term corporate infiltration operation would require patience, resources, and sophisticated coordination. It wasn't the work of amateurs or opportunists. "What makes you think I won't fold under pressure?" she asked, remembering how her last assignment had ended, with her barely escaping a blown operation that had cost lives. "Because you're the only agent who ever successfully turned 3 enemy operatives in a single mission," Chen replied. "And because when everything went wrong in Prague, you didn't just survive, you made sure your team did too." The mention of Prague sent a familiar chill through her. She had spent 2 years in therapy working through the guilt and trauma of that mission. Her therapist had helped her understand that her hypervigilance and inability to trust weren't character flaws. They were survival mechanisms that had served her well in dangerous situations, but made normal relationships nearly impossible. "I'll need complete operational autonomy," she heard herself saying, surprising them both. "No check-ins, no oversight, no backup that could compromise the mission if things go sideways." "Agreed. And when this is over, it's really over. No more calls, no more favors, no more emergencies that only I can handle." There was a long pause. "Understood." Sarah knew she was making a mistake even as the words left her mouth. "Send me the files." After ending the call, she sat in her sterile office cubicle, surrounded by the mundane concerns of profit margins and market analysis. But her mind was already shifting into the calculating, suspicious mode that had kept her alive through years of dangerous work. Her coworkers would see the same quiet Sarah Martinez tomorrow, diligently working on her assignments and eating lunch, alone at her desk. They would have no idea that she was studying their faces, cataloging their habits and beginning the delicate process of identifying which of them might be selling secrets to foreign powers. The transformation had begun, though. She was the only one who knew it. Sarah Martinez, the financial analyst, would continue her routine, but underneath, the operative was awakening, sharp, patient, and utterly ruthless when necessary. The question wasn't whether she would succeed in exposing Meridian's network. The question was whether she would recognize herself when it was all over. The files arrived through encrypted channels that same evening, delivered to a secure location Sarah hadn't visited in 3 years. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Arlington looked exactly as she remembered it, unremarkable from the outside, but equipped with communication systems that could rival most intelligence agencies. As she opened the digital dossier, photographs and profiles of suspected Meridian operatives filled the screen. What struck her immediately was how ordinary they looked. These weren't the stereotypical foreign agents from spy movies. They were accountants, marketing executives, IT specialists, and administrative assistants, people who could access sensitive information without raising suspicion. The pattern became clearer as she studied their backgrounds. All had been recruited within the past 18 months. All had some form of financial pressure or personal vulnerability that made them susceptible to coercion. Most importantly, all worked for companies that held contracts with government agencies or defense contractors. Marcus Webb, a systems administrator at a cybersecurity firm, had mounting medical bills from his daughter's cancer treatment. Elena Vasquez, an accountant at an aerospace company, was being blackmailed over an affair that could destroy her marriage. David Kim, a marketing manager at a telecommunications company, had gambling debts that exceeded his annual salary. Sarah recognized the recruitment strategy immediately. Meridian wasn't forcing these people to betray their employers. They were offering solutions to desperate situations. It was elegant, effective, and nearly impossible to detect until it was too late. Her own insertion into the network would require a different approach. She needed to become someone Meridian would want to recruit, someone with access to valuable information, but also with exploitable weaknesses. The next morning, Sarah began subtly altering her public profile. She opened several credit cards and made large purchases she couldn't afford on her analyst's salary. She started visiting expensive restaurants alone, paying with credit and leaving receipts where observant colleagues might notice. She began staying late at the office, accessing financial reports that were technically within her clearance, but unusual for someone in her position to review. Most importantly, she started making mistakes. Small ones at first. A miscalculation here, a missed deadline there. Nothing that would get her fired, but enough to create the impression of someone under stress, someone whose judgment might be compromised. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was psychological. Sarah found herself slipping back into the mindset that had defined her previous career. She noticed things her colleagues didn't. The way the security guard glanced at his phone at exactly the same time each day, suggesting he was receiving regular communications. The cleaning staff member who spent more time near certain desks than others. The pattern of after-hours badge swipes that didn't match the official overtime records. Within 2 weeks, she had identified at least 3 employees whose behavior suggested they might already be compromised, but Sarah knew better than to move too quickly. Meridian's handlers would be watching for any sign that their network had been discovered. Instead, she began building relationships with her targets through carefully orchestrated encounters. She started attending the weekly happy hour that she had always avoided, positioning herself where she could observe without seeming intrusive. She joined the company's softball team, despite having no interest in sports, because 2 suspected operatives were regular players. The breakthrough came during a casual conversation with Elena Vasquez in the office kitchen. Sarah had been rehearsing her financial problems for weeks, dropping hints about credit card debt and family obligations. When Elena mentioned knowing someone who might be able to help with side work, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with making contact. "What kind of side work?" Sarah asked, injecting just the right amount of desperation into her voice. Elena glanced around nervously before moving closer. Look, I know this sounds weird, but there are people who pay good money for information. Nothing illegal, just market research stuff that helps them make investment decisions. Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering the proposal for the first time. How much money are we talking about? Enough to make a real difference. But you have to be careful about what you share and how you share it. These people are serious about discretion. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment analyzing the conversation. Elena's approach was textbook, vague enough to maintain plausible deniability, but specific enough to gauge Sarah's interest. The next step would be a meeting with a handler, probably in a public place where surveillance would be difficult. She was right. 2 days later, Elena approached her again with an invitation to lunch at a busy downtown restaurant. When they arrived, they were joined by a well-dressed woman in her 40s who introduced herself only as Michelle. Michelle's assessment was thorough, but subtle. She asked about Sarah's work responsibilities, her access to financial data, her opinions on various market trends. But she also probed for personal information, family relationships, financial pressures, any factors that might make Sarah unreliable or likely to expose the arrangement. Sarah played her role perfectly, displaying just enough knowledge to be valuable, but not so much as to seem suspicious. She mentioned her debt problems without sounding desperate, expressed frustration with her career prospects without appearing disloyal to her employer. By the end of lunch, Michelle was clearly interested. "I think we might be able to work together," she said, sliding a business card across the table. "Think about what we discussed. If you're interested, call the number tomorrow evening at exactly 8 o'clock. Walking back to the office, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of excitement and dread that came with successful infiltration. She was inside Meridian's recruitment process, but she was also walking into danger with no backup and no safety net. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with the business card in front of her, knowing that the phone call she would make tomorrow would set everything in motion. There would be no turning back once she committed to playing the double agent, a role that had nearly destroyed her once before. But as she thought about the ordinary people going about their lives, unaware of the threat growing around them, she knew she had no choice. Sarah Martinez might have wanted a quiet life, but the operative inside her understood that some battles couldn't be avoided, only won or lost. The phone rang exactly twice before Michelle's voice answered. Sarah had spent the entire day mentally rehearsing this conversation, but her heart still raced as she spoke. "I've been thinking about our discussion," Sarah said, using the careful phrasing Michelle had suggested. "I'd like to learn more about the opportunities you mentioned." "Excellent. Are you free Saturday afternoon? There's someone I'd like you to meet." The meeting location was a coffee shop in Georgetown, busy enough to provide cover but intimate enough for private conversation. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table where she could observe the entrance while appearing to read a magazine. Michelle arrived precisely on time, accompanied by a man in his 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes. He moved with the subtle confidence Sarah recognized in experienced intelligence operatives, not the obvious swagger of someone trying to appear dangerous, but the quiet assurance of someone who actually was. "This is Robert," Michelle said as they sat down. "He coordinates our research projects." Robert studied Sarah with the same careful attention she was giving him. His questions were more direct than Michelle's had been, focusing on specific systems Sarah could access and the types of information that would be most valuable to their clients. "We're particularly interested in quarterly projections before they become public," Robert explained. "Market movement predictions, merger discussions, anything that might give our investors an edge." Sarah nodded, recognizing the careful language that skirted the edges of insider trading laws. "I see. And the compensation for this type of research?" $5,000 for routine reports, more for time-sensitive information. Payments are made through offshore accounts to protect everyone's privacy." The money was substantial but not enough to seem suspicious. Sarah had seen this approach before. Start with reasonable payments to establish trust, then gradually increase both the value and the risk level of requested information. "I'm interested," Sarah said, matching Robert's business-like tone. "When would I start?" "Immediately. We'll send you a list of specific companies and data points we're tracking. Nothing too dramatic for your first assignment, just quarterly revenue projections for 3 tech companies. That evening, Sarah received her first assignment through an encrypted messaging app. The companies listed were all publicly traded, but the specific financial data requested wouldn't be available to the general public for another month. Providing this information would definitely constitute insider trading, but it was relatively minor compared to what Sarah suspected Meridian was ultimately planning. She spent the weekend carefully crafting her response, providing accurate information that was valuable enough to establish her credibility, but not so sensitive as to cause immediate damage. The key was to appear useful while slowly working her way deeper into the organization. The payment arrived exactly as promised, transferred to an account Robert had helped her establish. Sarah was officially part of Meridian's network now, but she was still operating at the lowest level. The real intelligence would come from the operatives who had been working with them for months or years. Her next breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus Webb, the systems administrator she had identified as a possible operative, approached her in the company parking garage one evening. "Elena told me you might be interested in some side work," he said quietly, glancing around nervously. Sarah realized that Meridian was expanding her role, using her to recruit others or possibly testing her loyalty. "What kind of work?" "The kind that pays really well but requires absolute discretion." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her a banking app with a balance that was clearly far beyond his legitimate salary. "I've been doing research projects for some investors. They're always looking for people with access to good information." This was the opportunity Sarah had been waiting for. If Marcus was recruiting her into a different cell of the same network, she might be able to access multiple levels of the operation simultaneously. "Tell me more," she said. Marcus explained a more sophisticated version of what Robert had described. His handlers wanted technical specifications, security protocols, and infrastructure details from companies that held government contracts. The pay was higher, but so was the risk. "They're not just trading stocks," Marcus admitted. "They're building profiles of critical systems. They want to know how things work, where the vulnerabilities are." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. This wasn't just corporate espionage, it was preparation for something much more serious. Meridian was mapping the technological infrastructure of key industries, the kind of information that could be used for sabotage or large-scale cyber attacks. "Who are these people?" she asked. Marcus shrugged. "I don't know, and I don't ask. They pay on time. They don't ask for anything I can't deliver, and they protect their sources. That's all I care about." But Sarah could see the strain in his eyes. Marcus might claim he didn't care about the bigger picture, but he was clearly struggling with the implications of what he was doing. His daughter's medical bills had pushed him into this world, but now he was trapped by both the money and the knowledge that stopping would put his family at risk. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah worked both angles of her infiltration. She provided Robert's group with carefully selected financial data, while simultaneously building a relationship with Marcus's handlers. The dual role was exhausting and dangerous. One mistake could expose her to both networks simultaneously. The complexity of Meridian's structure began to emerge through these parallel relationships. They weren't just a single espionage network, but a collection of interconnected cells, each focused on different types of intelligence. Financial data from one cell, technical specifications from another, personnel information from a third. No single operative had access to the complete picture, which made the network more secure but also more dangerous. Sarah was beginning to understand the true scope of what she was facing. Meridian wasn't just gathering information to sell. They were building a comprehensive profile of American corporate and technological infrastructure, the kind of information that could be used to cripple entire industries with precisely targeted attacks. But even as she pieced together their strategy, Sarah realized that her own position was becoming increasingly precarious. The longer she operated within their network, the more suspicious her handlers would become of any investigator who got too close to their operation. She was walking a tightrope between maintaining her cover and gathering enough evidence to expose them. One false step would mean not just the failure of her mission, but quite possibly her life. The quiet financial analyst Sarah Martinez was disappearing entirely, replaced by someone who lived constantly on the edge of discovery, playing a game where the stakes grew higher every day. The first sign that something had changed came during what should have been a routine information drop. Sarah arrived at the designated coffee shop to find Robert waiting with a different expression than she had seen before, not the businesslike confidence of their earlier meetings, but something harder and more calculating. "We need to discuss an evolution in your role," he said without the usual pleasantries. "Your work has been exceptional, and we'd like to offer you an opportunity for significantly higher compensation." Sarah felt the familiar tightening in her stomach that came with recognizing a trap. In her experience, sudden promotions in criminal organizations usually meant either that someone was being set up for a fall or that the operation was moving into a more dangerous phase. "What kind of opportunity?" she asked. Robert slid a tablet across the table, showing what appeared to be architectural plans. "We need someone to access physical locations, not just computer systems. Your background makes you ideal for this type of work." Sarah studied the plans while her mind raced. They were detailed schematics of a data center belonging to a major telecommunications company, the kind of facility that handled critical infrastructure communications. The level of detail suggested inside access, possibly from someone with security clearance. "This seems like more than market research," she said carefully. "The compensation reflects the increased complexity," Robert replied. $50,000 for a single night's work. All you need to do is plug in a small device that will help our technical team understand the network architecture. Every instinct Sarah had developed over years of covert work screamed danger. This wasn't insider trading or corporate espionage. This was preparation for an attack on critical infrastructure. The device Robert wanted her to install was almost certainly malware designed to give Meridian access to telecommunications systems. But refusing would end her infiltration immediately, and she was closer than ever to understanding their complete operation. She needed to find a way to appear cooperative while preventing actual damage. "I'll need time to plan this carefully," she said. "Security at facilities like this is designed to catch exactly this kind of intrusion." Robert nodded approvingly. "We wouldn't want you to take unnecessary risks. Take whatever time you need, but understand that this opportunity won't be available indefinitely." That evening, Sarah made contact with Director Chen for the first time since beginning her infiltration. The communication protocol they had established required her to visit 3 different locations, leaving coded messages that would eventually reach him through multiple intermediaries. His response came back within hours. "Continue the mission. We're tracking parallel activities that confirm your intelligence. National security priority." Sarah stared at the message, understanding its implications. Chen's team had detected other signs of Meridian's preparation for large-scale operations. Her infiltration wasn't just gathering intelligence anymore. It was potentially the only way to prevent a major attack on American infrastructure. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and rising tension. Sarah used her legitimate work responsibilities to research the target facility, identifying potential entry points and security vulnerabilities. But she was also planning how to sabotage her own mission, how to appear to install Meridian's device while actually providing them with useless hardware that would reveal their intentions without giving them actual access. Her plan required help from someone with technical expertise she didn't possess. Against all protocol, she reached out to David Kim, the marketing manager she had identified as another Meridian operative. Their meeting was arranged through the same careful channels Meridian used for all internal communications. David agreed to meet her at a bookstore in Arlington, a location busy enough to mask their conversation but isolated enough for sensitive topics. "I need technical advice," Sarah said, after they had established they were both working for the same organization, something about network hardware. David's expression shifted as he realized the sensitivity of her request. "What kind of technical advice?" Sarah explained her assignment in general terms, watching David's reaction carefully. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the same struggle between financial desperation and moral conscience that she had observed in Marcus. "That's not market research," David said quietly. That's something else entirely. I know, but I'm in too deep to back out now, and you know what happens to people who try to leave this organization. It was a calculated risk, implying knowledge of consequences she hadn't actually witnessed. But David's immediate pallor suggested she had guessed correctly about Meridian's methods for handling security breaches. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I need to know how to make it look like I'm installing their device while actually installing something harmless. Something that will pass basic functionality tests but won't actually give them access." David was quiet for a long moment, apparently weighing risks she couldn't fully see. Finally, he nodded. "I might be able to help with that, but if they discover what we're doing—" "They won't," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "Not if we do this right." Over the next week, David provided her with a sophisticated piece of counter-surveillance technology disguised as the network access device Meridian had given her. To any casual inspection, it would appear identical to their hardware. But instead of providing network access, it would transmit false data while secretly recording any attempts to use it. The night of the operation, Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission tension that she had hoped never to experience again. Every detail had been planned, every contingency considered, but she knew from experience that no plan survived contact with reality. The data center's physical security was exactly as challenging as she had expected. Sarah's cover story, a systems audit that required after-hours access, got her through the initial checkpoints, but cameras and motion sensors throughout the facility meant that every movement had to appear routine. Installing the device took less than 3 minutes, but those minutes felt like hours. Sarah's hands remained steady despite her racing heart, her training overriding the fear that threatened to paralyze her. Walking out of the facility, Sarah felt the same mixture of relief and dread that had defined her previous career. She had successfully completed the mission, but she had also crossed a line that put her deeper into Meridian's trust and deeper into danger. The payment arrived the next day, along with praise for her professionalism and a suggestion that more such opportunities would be available soon. Sarah realized that she had passed some kind of test, proving her value to the organization. But she had also proven something to herself. Despite 3 years of trying to live as a normal person, the operative was still there beneath the surface, still capable of the deception and calculated risk-taking that had once defined her life. The question now was whether she could maintain her infiltration long enough to gather the evidence needed to expose Meridian's complete network, or whether the psychological strain of living a double life would destroy her before she could complete the mission. The consequences of Sarah's successful data center infiltration became clear within 72 hours. Robert contacted her with a new assignment, not another physical intrusion, but something far more personal and dangerous. "We have a problem," he said during their meeting at yet another anonymous coffee shop. "Someone has been asking questions about our research network. We need you to help us identify who it might be." Sarah's blood chilled, but she maintained her composure. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest law enforcement or intelligence interest. Someone with access to financial records has been tracking unusual payment patterns to our associates." Robert's eyes studied Sarah's face carefully. "We need to know if this inquiry originated from within your company or from outside sources." This was the nightmare scenario Sarah had been dreading. Meridian suspected they were under investigation, which meant they would be looking for the source of that investigation. Her own position became exponentially more dangerous. She was simultaneously the hunter and the hunted. "How do you want me to investigate this?" she asked. "Carefully. We're not asking you to expose yourself or take unnecessary risks, but you have legitimate access to personnel files and financial systems. Look for anyone who might have been conducting the kind of research that would reveal our activities." Sarah realized that Robert was essentially asking her to investigate herself. It was a test of loyalty, but also a potential trap. If she appeared too eager to help, it might suggest she knew more about the investigation than she should. If she seemed reluctant, it could raise suspicions about her commitment. "I'll need some specifics about what kind of patterns you're concerned about," she said. Robert provided details that confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Meridian's security team had detected exactly the kind of financial analysis that would reveal their payment network. Someone with sophisticated knowledge of money laundering detection had been systematically mapping their monetary flows. The irony was that Sarah herself wasn't responsible for this analysis. Director Chen's team had been conducting parallel investigations using different methods. But explaining that would require revealing knowledge she shouldn't possess. Over the next week, Sarah walked an increasingly narrow line between appearing helpful and avoiding actual betrayal of her mission. She provided Robert with analysis that appeared thorough but actually misdirected attention away from the real investigation. Her strategy involved creating false leads, suggesting that the financial analysis might have originated from routine regulatory compliance checks rather than targeted intelligence gathering. She provided documentation of legitimate audit activities that could explain the suspicious queries without revealing the true source. But even as she managed this deception, Sarah realized that her time was running out. Meridian's paranoia was increasing daily, and sooner or later their investigation would focus on the most obvious explanation, that the threat was coming from within their own network. The crisis came during what should have been a routine meeting with Marcus Webb. Instead of discussing technical specifications, Marcus seemed agitated and suspicious. "Something's not right," he said without preamble. "They're asking too many questions about operational security, about who might have access to what information." Sarah's heart raced, but she forced herself to appear calm. "Isn't that normal? Given what we're doing, they have to be careful. This is different. They're not just being careful. They're scared." Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I think they're planning to shut down operations soon, maybe permanently." The implications hit Sarah immediately. If Meridian was planning to dissolve their network, they would also be planning to eliminate potential witnesses. Every operative who could identify handlers or describe methods would become a security risk. "What makes you think that?" she asked. "They've been asking about contingency plans, about how quickly I could disappear if necessary. And yesterday, Elena didn't show up for a scheduled meeting. Her handler said she was sick, but I tried calling her and her phone goes straight to voicemail." Sarah felt the familiar chill that came with recognizing mortal danger. Elena's disappearance could mean many things, but none of them were good. Either she had been arrested by law enforcement, in which case Meridian might decide to eliminate anyone who could be connected to her, or she had been eliminated by Meridian themselves as a security precaution. "We need to be very careful," Sarah said, knowing that her words applied as much to herself as to Marcus. That evening, Sarah broke protocol and made direct contact with Director Chen. The risk of exposure was enormous, but the alternative, waiting passively while Meridian prepared to eliminate their entire network, was even worse. Chen's response was immediate and decisive. "Extraction protocols activated. You have 24 hours to gather final intelligence before we move to shut them down. 24 hours to complete a mission that had already taken months." Sarah knew it was barely possible, but she also knew it was her only chance to emerge from this operation alive. Her plan required taking enormous risks with all three of her network contacts. She needed to convince Robert, Marcus, and David to provide information that would allow law enforcement to identify Meridian's complete structure before the organization could disappear. The approach she chose was as dangerous as it was direct. She would convince each of them that the network was about to collapse and that cooperating with authorities was their only chance for survival. It meant revealing knowledge she shouldn't possess and making promises she couldn't guarantee. But it was the only strategy that might work in the time available. Sarah started with David Kim, using his obvious guilt about his involvement as leverage. She met him at the bookstore where they had discussed technical matters, but this time her message was completely different. "They're going to kill us," she said without preamble. "All of us. Elena is already gone, and we're next." David's face went pale. "What are you talking about? Meridian knows they're under investigation. They're planning to eliminate everyone who can connect them to their operations. You, me, Marcus. We're all liabilities now. It was a calculated gamble, playing on fears that Sarah suspected David already harbored. His reaction confirmed that. Her instincts were correct. "What can we do?" he asked. "We can cooperate with the people who are investigating them, provide information in exchange for protection." David stared at her for a long moment, clearly struggling with implications he was only beginning to understand. Finally, he nodded. "What do you need to know?" The final confrontation came sooner than Maria expected. Victor had grown increasingly suspicious over the past week, asking probing questions that suggested he was testing her loyalty. When he called requesting an urgent meeting at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Maria knew her cover was blown. She arrived at the designated location to find Victor waiting with two associates she had never seen before. The warehouse was empty, except for a few chairs arranged in the center of the space, clearly set up for an interrogation rather than a business meeting. "We need to discuss some inconsistencies in your recent reports," Victor said without his usual charm. His voice was cold, professional, and utterly menacing. Maria's heart raced, but years of training kept her expression calm. She had prepared for this moment, knowing that eventual exposure was almost inevitable in deep cover operations. The key was to maintain her role long enough to complete the mission. "What kind of inconsistencies?" she asked, settling into the chair Victor indicated, while mentally cataloging potential escape routes. "The kind that suggest you might not be who you claim to be," Victor replied. "Some of the information you've provided has been problematic for our operations." Maria realized that the false intelligence she had been feeding them had finally been detected. The network had discovered that her reports contained subtle inaccuracies designed to protect genuine national security while appearing legitimate enough to maintain her cover. "I don't understand," she said, injecting confusion and fear into her voice. "I've been providing exactly what you asked for." Victor pulled out a tablet, displaying side-by-side comparisons of her reports with information they had obtained from other sources. The discrepancies were small but significant, enough to compromise operational plans without being obvious enough to detect immediately. "Either you're incompetent," Victor said slowly, "or you're deliberately sabotaging our work." "Which is it?" Maria knew that her answer would determine whether she walked out of the warehouse alive, but she also knew that FBI agents were positioned outside, ready to move the moment she gave the predetermined signal. "Maybe I made some mistakes," she said carefully. "The pressure of this work is harder than I expected. I've been worried about getting caught, about what would happen to my mother if I went to prison." It was exactly the kind of response Victor would expect from someone breaking under stress. Maria could see him evaluating her words, trying to determine whether fear might explain the problems they had encountered. "Fear can make people careless," he agreed, "but it can also make them unreliable." One of Victor's associates whispered, something in his ear that made his expression harden. Maria realized they had reached a decision about her fate and it wasn't good. "Unfortunately," Victor continued, "we can't afford to work with unreliable people. Too much is at stake." "Yo." Associate reached inside his jacket, but Maria was already moving. Years of defensive training that she had hoped never to use kicked in as she dove behind the nearest cover while simultaneously pressing the panic button hidden in her watch. The warehouse erupted in chaos as FBI agents stormed through multiple entrances, shouting commands and drawing weapons. Victor and his associates were caught completely off guard, clearly not expecting law enforcement to know about their location. In the confusion that followed, Maria managed to reach the evidence bag she had hidden near the entrance. It contained copies of all the intelligence she had gathered over the past 3 months, detailed records of the recruitment network, financial transfers, operational plans, and most importantly, the identities of every American citizen who had been compromised. The arrests happened quickly. Victor tried to destroy evidence on his tablet, but Maria tackled him before he could complete the process. Elena attempted to flee through a back exit, but ran directly into a team of agents who had been waiting for exactly that possibility. Within an hour, 12 people were in custody. including the entire leadership of a foreign intelligence network that had been operating in Washington, D.C. for over 2 years. The evidence Maria had gathered would lead to the identification and prosecution of 37 American citizens who had been selling classified information. Later, as she gave her statement to Director Johnson, Maria reflected on how much she had changed during the operation. The quiet analyst who preferred paperwork had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed. She had successfully penetrated a sophisticated spy network, gathered critical intelligence, and helped prevent what could have been catastrophic damage to national security. "They really believed you would fold under pressure," Johnson observed, as they reviewed the case files. "Right up until the moment you turned the tables on them." Maria nodded, thinking about the psychological profiles Victor's team had developed about her. They had seen exactly what she wanted them to see: a vulnerable government employee who could be manipulated through financial pressure and career frustration. They never suspected that beneath the carefully constructed facade was someone with the intelligence, determination, and courage to expose their entire operation. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. The network that had successfully recruited dozens of American traitors had finally met someone who couldn't be bought, coerced, or intimidated, someone who had spent months pretending to be exactly what they were looking for, while systematically documenting everything they needed to destroy them. Maria Santos had proven that sometimes the most dangerous opponents are the ones you never see coming. The quiet people who observe everything, remember everything, and strike only when they're certain of victory. Victor's network had fatally underestimated her, and that miscalculation had cost them everything.